Today we are joined by Jon Gillham with Originality.ai. We're going to be talking about content optimization.
The content optimization has existed from the beginning, and the content itself is incredibly significant, but not the only factor that matters. Even if the score gets to perfect, there's other factors involved.
Is it the optimization process that people should be focused on, or is the scoring actually hurting people in how they use these tools?
Well, I think the pursuit of a score hurts people. A perfect optimized piece of content is you take the top 10 articles, put them in a blender, press blend, and you get out the perfect average derivative piece of content with nothing new in it. And that is a perfectly optimized piece of content.
What do you see trend in terms of successful writers?
Base expertise, interest, knowledge of the domain that they're writing about.
Over-optimization was one of the biggest triggers for websites being demoted in the HCU. How does that play in to the studying that you've done?
If you're just trying to produce the best words, it's really hard when marketers go beyond words and add unique data, unique tools, sort of thinking about content marketing beyond words. That has really helped in the world of HCU.
So what are some of those hard to act on factors that go into this new way to kind of evaluate things?
It's sort of the mind trip when it comes to sort of AI systems is that it's a full black box. And in Google, it's gotten to the point where, it's almost the same answer when you ask, John Mueller or any other sort of search liaison, why is this ranking ahead of this? It's like kind of word diarrhea, non-answer. We don't know, because that's what the AI said. And so what are those factors?
All right. Welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we are joined by Jon Gillham with Originality.ai, a repeat visitor. Jon, welcome.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, always happy to be chatting with you.
Yeah, last time we chatted, we talked a lot about some of the concepts that might come up today, but it is a different direction today. It's going to be a different conversation based on a lot of the data that you guys are seeing and some of the things that it has meant. And so I just think content creators in general are going to get a lot out of today. Why don't you, if people didn't hear the last episode or aren't familiar with you, Originality.ai, maybe give us a little bit of a background on yourself. I know you've had your hands in a lot of stuff over the years. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, sounds good. So my background, some mechanical engineer by education, went to work at a refinery, wanted to get back to my hometown, and started building online businesses. This is sort of back in the days of 20-page sites and sort of the full niche site era, back kind of 2010. Built up a portfolio of sites, built up some other businesses, some e-commerce, some FBA, some SaaS businesses. All of them sort of centered around the concept of producing content, getting traffic from Google, and then built up a content agency, sold that content agency, and in that process had sort of seen this wave of generative AI coming with tools like Jasper, built Originality as sort of a modern day enterprise level content quality QA QC tool that sort of replaced Copyscape, replaced some other tools. And that's about the journey that I've been on for the last, 2 and a bit years now.
Yeah, you kind of touched on almost everything that at different times, at different eras has kind of been in the online marketing world, the content creation world. Today, we're going to be talking about, from a high level, we'll be going through content optimization. And certainly, just like your story has evolved so much, I think optimizing content has evolved a lot. Maybe set the stage for us, what we're talking about today, why it's relevant, why it matters, how it's evolved, kind of give us this broad overview of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So, I think, there's such value in being able to produce content and predictably get traffic from Google. Businesses, industries are built off the back of that sort of simple concept. And the more effective you are at producing content that will rank in Google, the more exciting that promise is. So there's been tools over the years that have been developed to try and reverse engineer what is already performing well in Google, and then give you suggestions on how to make your content more like that content so that you can then also rank well in Google. And there's been sort of varying degrees of success of that, but that's sort of the central promise of content optimization, is saying, let's look at what Google's rewarding, and let's look at your content, and let's get your content closer to the content that's already ranking, and the promise of we will be more like if you make your content more like this, then it's more likely to rank in Google.
We're going to get into the idea that this has had its ups and downs over the years. People have been in content creation for a while will know that when content optimization has been happening from the beginning of Google and the beginning of stuff ranking, tools have started to help that process and make it easier. And then in many of Google's updates over the years, we've seen connections or correlations to over-optimized content getting then dropped in the rankings. So we'll get into all that, folks. I got all those questions on my agenda here. Don't worry. But it is true that from a high level, you can still look at what's ranking in Google, whether over-optimized content does or doesn't perform well. You can still look at what's ranking on the first page and on the first 3 results of Google and kind of use that to emulate where you want to go.
I think that's certainly true. I mean, it is not as simple as I think the sort of that central premise of like, hey, just be like this and you will do well. But it's like you can take away the intent on what people are seeking with the content. You can understand sort of the how the topic has been covered, and so that there are absolutely learnings to be had from what is ranking in Google for the keyword that you're also trying to rank for. It's just not as simple as like, throw all those pieces of content into a blender and take out the output, and now you produce the perfect piece.
Hey, Jared here. Just a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get right back to the episode. If you want to see one of Niche Site Lady's websites, she has a little case study going on. The site is called veganwins.co.uk, and she's sharing everything she's doing with it publicly. The site was built for her by Web Asset Builders, and you can get one done for yourself as well. These social-first niche websites are designed to capture the attention of people on Facebook, complete with engaging content, visuals, and even newsletter lead magnets. Check out webassetbuilders.com if you'd like to learn more. They even have installment payment options available. You can use coupon code NichePursuits on checkout to get 20% off all offers. Again, that's webassetbuilders.com. Coupon code NichePursuits, all one word, for 20% off. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, it's safe to say that looking at the top couple results, doing all the things they're doing, and then making sure you have a couple other things, boxes checked as well, and you're good to go. It's different than that. So good clarification. Okay, so let's talk about content optimizers and get into them, because there's tools, there's services, there's SaaSes for that. Let's get into maybe the promise behind them, what they do, what they don't do.
Yeah. So the sort of, and you're exactly right. Is like it goes back to like the content optimization has existed from the beginning in terms of like, hey, have you included the main keyword in your title? Like that was like a Yoast SEO WordPress plugin, and SEO 101 is like some quick checks to make sure that what's your keyword you're trying to rank for, and is that included in the title? Is that included in the first, the meta description, etc. That was like way back. That evolved into call it like a dumb math approach, where it's like what keywords are on the top 10 results. So using correlation to look at what keywords and what content and questions are included in the top 10 results for the keyword that you're going after, and then comparing that to your own piece of content and suggesting you to close that gap. And so there's popular tools like Surfer, Market Muse, ClearScope, Page Optimizer Pro, some of the more popular ones. A lot of tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush has some similar tools. And what they look at is, okay, what's ranking on the first page? And then how do you create your piece of content to look as similar to that as possible? Some of the sort of downsides to that is that it can lead to, it pushes you to produce this very derivative piece of work, provide net new information. It pushes you to keyword stuff, because you want your score to go up, and so if you put all those keywords in, your score goes up. Not a great. So those are some of that's sort of how these optimizers work, and then we can dig into some of the challenges with that approach, and some of the kind of the Google updates that have come out to sort of attack the overuse of them.
There's I like how you said dumb math, and then I kind of wanted to ask a question spinning off of that. Like, you kind of went through some of the content optimizing tools that we'll be familiar with. At its most basic level, like a lot of people are going to be familiar with Yoast and getting it, from orange to green. Other
Yep.
people, scoring systems are used. These scoring systems are based on a collection of facts. Like, do you think that, in your experience with content optimizers, is it the optimization process that people should be focused on, or is the scoring actually hurting people in how they use these tools?
I think the scoring hurts people. I think the pursuit of a score hurts people. I can fully. I'm a systems guy at heart who is terrible at writing and has spent over a decade in the world of producing content that ranks in Google. And so I desperately want it to work as a, hey, writer, hit X score, and that is good, and produce this sort of really objective measure on what is required to be able to rank predictably in Google. If there was a formula and a system and a machine that could be built that would do that as reliably as possible, that would be awesome. I think what happens is, in the pursuit of that, so many of us sort of pick an arbitrary number without understanding the risks associated with that, and the result is very predictable, which is writers do a good job and then say, in order for me to get paid, I need to hit this score, and then they just stuff in derivative information, rehashed information, nothing net new, and you get a better score, but not better rankings.
It reminds me of Yoast and getting it to green, right? So it's not, excuse me, it's not a score, but it's something kind of similar. We'll have clients who will say this piece of content you created, it only gets an orange score. Shouldn't all your content be green and stuff? So it does kind of go into those issues. What are some other challenges that come along with using an optimizer? We talked about the scoring, but what else exists?
The big problem is that there's a large push to create average content, and so the sort of that's call it the core problem of them is that it says it rewards you for creating an average piece of work. Google rewards you for net new information, and so the score rewards you for producing a derivative piece of work, average piece of content of what's already ranking, and Google, we know, rewards for net new information gain. So that's kind of called the core problem with them. The sort of secondary problems are they're very easily manipulated. So if you just sort of copy all the keywords that are being suggested to be included, paste it into the document, you can get a great score, but it's a junk. It's an illogical piece of text. And then ultimately, the way people are trying to use these scores is to try and have them be highly correlated. So how correlated, how predictive is that score of actually how high you're going to rank? And the reality is that they are not highly correlated. Google takes into consideration a ton of factors. How much of a factor is the content score versus and the content quality versus the backlink, reputation, all these other factors. So content matters, but it is not the only factor that Google considers. And so you're already starting with sort of a you can only get the content itself is incredibly significant, but not the only factor that matters in how Google ranks content. And therefore, the score, even if the score gets to perfect, there's other factors involved in how well that will rank. So the end result between sort of that producing average pushes you to produce an average piece of content, easily manipulated, results in it being not highly correlated.
What just so that we kind of put it out there, those are the challenges, those are the problems. I think people listening who have done content creation for a while will kind of understand that. And I have a note to ask you about how we do all this in a day and era where a lot of people listening are going to be hiring out the content creation portion for their business, and so you have an added layer of challenge when you're using this sort of system. But what are the positives? Maybe for someone listening who hasn't ever utilized a content optimization process or piece of SaaS or something like that, what are the upsides, especially in today's day and age?
Yeah, so I think ensuring complete coverage of the topic. is one of the it can be they can be really helpful in helping you understand. Ooh, you're right. I should have covered that aspect of like we got skied all last week, so I got lip chap sitting on my counter here. But like if you're writing a topic about lip chap, then probably and you were talking about hydration or whatever. Not an expert at it, but you might miss sort of the sunscreen aspect of it, or like the SPF aspect of lip chap, and it's like, oh, everyone else covered that. I should probably include however that topic makes sense within my piece of content. So I think they're very helpful for ensuring that there is no sort of significant gaps in your piece of content that everyone else has covered. If everyone else has covered a specific topic and you're left it totally out of your piece of content and you're trying to rank for that same keyword, probably should investigate how it makes sense to tie that concept into your piece of content.
Yeah. Okay, those are some great points. Yeah. Let's talk about any other specific problems, whether it's highly specific, maybe something that you've noticed over the years, examples you've seen, something that is a little bit less high level, but maybe more in the weeds.
Yeah, so I think so there's kind of two things. One one tool, so Surfer itself, when their auto optimized score, kind of really in the weeds, but they have there's an interesting kind of finding that we had where if you auto optimize using the Surfer score and then you paste that same piece of content into a new document, they've actually sort of like juiced it appears that they have juiced their auto optimized score, as opposed to if you put it in a piece of text, click auto optimize, the score will go up. Then you copy that piece of text into a blank new Surfer window. The score will be lower than the auto optimize score, showing that they have somehow sort of had because you've pressed the auto optimize button, the score is now higher. So that was sort of a pretty interesting finding that we had that seems to sort of make the believability of the score lower.
Another knock on the score, yeah, and only further evidence of the scoring system. That's interesting. So it's almost like if you follow the advice, again, like if you were in the orange on Yoast, I'll give the Yoast example for people who are familiar. Like if you're on the orange and you hit a couple buttons to follow their advice, it will more likely go to green, even if the optimizations didn't actually make the improvements that were recommended.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's and I appreciate the desire to like sort of have a standardized system and say like green on Yoast, X score on this tool, and how do I, without having to read every single piece of content that gets produced within a business, how do I make sure the quality stays high? But that can lead us down to some problems that Google will ultimately punish us for.
It's probably a good time to ask you the question about the helpful content update. There are so many theories out there about, hey, what correlates with helpful content, what negatively correlates against helpful content. We had Cyrus Shepard on maybe 6 months ago. He presented a data study that he did that showed that over-optimization was one of the biggest triggers for websites being demoted in the HCU. I mean, how does that play in to the studying that you've done? How does HCU specifically affect content optimization? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if we look at the sort of the historical context of Google, I mean, if we go way back, just fire in all the keywords, put it into white text, and like full keyword stuff. I think any opportunity that there is to sort of programmatically game Google, Google has done a pretty good job over the years of closing that gap. So content optimizers, when they first came in, I think were quite effective, and that efficacy has dropped over time as a result of some of the updates. But specifically when it comes to the helpful content update, what we have seen is that there's been a significant push around information gain. If you are both in our own content marketing, in what we've seen from clients that heavily use our tool and the discussions we've had, if you're just trying to produce the best words, it's really hard. When marketers go beyond words and add unique data, unique tools, sort of thinking about content marketing beyond words, that has really helped in the world of HCU. So whether that be free tool sites, whether that be unique data brought into existing content, unique visuals. When people bring net new information, especially when that sort of net new information, net value add is different than just sort of like, yep, these 100 words are all the optimal 100 words, but it's that there's some unique value being contributed. That's where we've seen sort of some of the best marketing success, and that sort of makes sense in the world where we have LLMs kicking out words, well-written words at basically at free cost. So if our content marketing is competing just on words, we're up against a pretty challenging foe of AI generated content being spit out at near infinite volumes.
So if I were to almost reshare from a different angle, it isn't necessarily that HCU hit content is over optimized, although that could be a player. But perhaps what you're saying is also look at the fact that content that's been run through an optimizer tool and hasn't had information gain added to it is going to look a lot like over-optimized content without valuable content that Google is requiring more and more these days, especially because of the advent and onslaught of LLM content.
Exactly. And like, if you think about, a perfect optimized piece of content using the current approach of content optimizers is you take the top 10 articles, put them in a blender, press blend, and you get out the perfect average derivative piece of content with nothing new in it. And that is a perfectly optimized piece of content according to the sort of the dumb math approach of how many times is this keyword mentioned on average across these 10 results. Put that into your piece of content that number of times. That sort of machine forces you to produce this very average piece of content that with no new information added into it. And so when the helpful content comes around, it looks like a very very over optimized piece of content.
Right. With very little or nothing added to it. That was unique and new. Okay. Yeah, I mean the idea of information gain has been around, certainly has gained prominence as a lot of the stuff that you've already shared has come to prominence. I mean, let's kind of get into the second half of this interview, which is, is there a better alternative than content optimization for creating content now? And I'm starting to wonder if we're starting to get to a point where there is a place for content optimizers in this conversation, but it's only part of the equation, not maybe the entire equation.
Yeah, and so I mean, certainly what we've attempted to do. So at Originality, we view ourselves as sort of that final check before you hit publish. That it's sort of almost irresponsible to hit publish on a piece of content without running it through Originality, where we check for AI, plagiarism, fact checking, grammar, spelling, readability, and then sort of our newest feature is sort of a different approach to content optimization. And so what we've aimed to do is build our own black box, sort of reverse engineer what Google ranks for given keywords, build our own AI machine that looks at the sort of massive data set of Google results and like keyword, what did Google rank for, and then train an AI to provide a score on how likely a certain piece of content is to rank. And so sort of achieve that same outcome that we're after with when we're using content optimizers on how likely is this piece of content going to rank. The downside is that it becomes far less actionable. So it's not, we're unable to say like, okay, add these 5 keywords and your score is going to go up. But we can provide with far higher confidence when we ran our own study looking at how predictive is our score compared to existing content optimization scores. at predicting how well a piece of content is going to rank. This sort of AI approach, as opposed to a dumb math approach on how well this piece of content will perform, is far more accurate, but far less actionable. And so the way we use it now is that for our own content marketing, we check to make sure that the content meets a certain threshold, and then don't give a ton of guidance back to the writer, but then we'll work with writers who ultimately have higher likelihood of ranking well in Google.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of Niche Pursuits. Did you know that you can find and fix your Orphan pages in the WordPress dashboard with Link Whisper? An Orphan page is an article you've published with no internal links pointing to it from other articles on your site. Why should you fix your Orphan pages? Well, it makes your site easier to crawl for Google, which can lead to more search traffic and improve your UX for your visitors. With Link Whisper, there is no need for expensive crawlers and tedious spreadsheets. Link Whisper simplifies the entire process. The Orphan page dashboard in Link Whisper shows which pages need attention. It even recommends the perfect anchor text for your internal links. Ready to revolutionize your site's internal linking? Try Link Whisper today. Use the code PODCAST and get $15 off your purchase.
So what are some of those hard to act on factors that go into this new way to kind of evaluate things?
It's sort of the mind trip when it comes to sort of AI systems, is that it's a full black box. And Google has gotten to the point where, it's almost the same answer when you ask, John Mueller or any other sort of search liaison, why is this ranking ahead of this? It's like kind of word diarrhea, non-answer, we don't know, because that's what the AI said. And so, like, what are those factors? Our own AI that sort of our AI engineers went and trained up. We can't reverse engineer it ourselves. The same as like Google can't really reverse engineer its ranking now either. We can evaluate its effectiveness and say, how likely is this piece of content to rank higher? And then we provide recommendations on like strategies to try and improve it. So it's like, you didn't cover this topic. The intent is clearly buyer intent, and that is a miss in terms of the intent of this piece of content. And so we provide recommendations, but those recommendations are loosely attached to the actual score, very similar to what you would get if you asked an SEO, like if you pick one of the world's best SEOs, question mark on kind of who or is that even real? But if you ask someone that isn't sort of an SEO expert, content marketing expert, and say, how should I make this piece of content better? Those suggestions are not not going to be rooted in certainty. There's always going to be some probability that those suggestions may or may not lead to the outcome that they're actually after. And so it's sort of a long way from the dream of like, add these 10 things and your score will go up and your rankings will go up. But it is far closer to the goal of here's a score that you can have some confidence in knowing whether or not that piece of content is going to perform well in Google.
Maybe more in a practical sense, then what would something like that look like? Like, what would it look like to run an article, whether it's through your scoring system or even just through a process of looking at it from a new lens, a new angle? What kind of factors tend to come out? What kind of factors could come out? What kind of things is it? Because you're right, everyone's going to be very used to hearing like, hey, you need more H2s. Hey, you don't have this keyword. Hey, if you're using variations of this. Hey, word count. Hey, these sorts of things, right? And if that's not what an optimization process looks like now, like what are just some examples of what it could look like going forward?
The system will, like our own system will provide recommendations that look very similar to what you just described. Some of the things that I think we should consider as marketers in terms of whether or not this piece of content is going to rank well in Google is a question on, does it bring anything new to the table that is not currently in the top 10 results that would be useful to the audience. I'll use an example, a very sort of on point example. But we rank number one for content optimizer and content optimizers with a free tool because although we had no backlinks to the page, although we had sort of far less topical relevance than a bunch of other tools, we are the only site, and we removed it for now, but we'll probably add it back. But we're the only site that had a 100% free, no login required content optimizer, and so that helped us produce something new into the world that added value, that resulted in us getting in Google's eyes we had great user metrics on that page, information gain, serving their needs, and when people search for a content optimizer, we were ranking number one as a result of adding a free tool which didn't currently exist in the top 10 results on Google.
Let's touch on that information gain topic a bit. You talked about it earlier. I took some notes. Even if you just want to rapid fire off some different examples you've seen work well in the wild, what are some examples of tangible information gain elements people can consider adding? Earlier you said unique data, you said unique visuals, you just mentioned a free tool. What are some other things that you've seen be effective that people can look at their content and look at their brand and say, "Ooh, I could actually go about getting that sort of information into my content"?
Yeah. So anytime that you're providing unique data, it doesn't need to be a monster study. We love doing our monster studies and doing sort of like some dashboards that look at how many bots are blocking Chat and GPT bot. We love our sort of big studies that are engineering resource intensive. But even if it's a small review, even if it's a review article, we do a ton of review articles around both ourselves and competitors, and we always use the tool and then evaluate it against how, for example, an AI writer, how detectable it is with our AI detection tool, and so that we provide some unique data into that review article that doesn't currently exist on the web. So any data doesn't need to be a monster study, even if it's 10. Sometimes it's as little as 10. We sort of clearly state that this is not sort of a statistically significant study, but it's directionally useful data. So anytime you can add data that doesn't currently exist, that's a great sign that you're on the right track. Any tools, anytime that you can produce a tool that meets the searcher's intent and solves the searcher's problem more than explaining how, any resource. So if it's so less from sort of my own personal example, but like from what I've used. But if I'm looking for a spreadsheet to evaluate some calculation, is there an easy to download or easy to click through to Google Sheet that I can use? So anytime that there's value beyond words, and thinking about beyond words, I think that's been sort of my communication to our own marketing team, which has worked well for our own sort of organic traffic, where we're sort of now like a couple of years old, but over a million searches, million visitors from Google a month. And the big push has been around think beyond words on how you can add value to the user.
Yeah, tools are interesting, right? Because with AI, like they've gotten a lot easier for the average everyday content creator to produce them. And unique data is an interesting one because you kind of touched on what I was going to ask you about, like how big do these data studies need to be? Have you seen any success from an information standpoint with not necessarily going out and obtaining the data yourself, but slicing and dicing and combining different data sources to present new findings that maybe haven't been found before? So you're not actually having to take on the burden of going out and building this data set, testing everything, whatever that looks like, but you're actually sourcing different data sets and then bringing them together in a new information gain trigger, air quotes, a new way that has compelling information.
So I'd say I haven't seen that done well. I'm hesitant to sort of like want to so I'd say we've looked for opportunities to do that ourselves, and I've looked at others. I've not seen that done really well. I've seen it done well from a digital PR standpoint. So taking some existing data, slicing it into a creative story, and then doing a digital PR sort of effort around it, and then getting the backlinks for that. I think that there's a lot of value in that. But in terms of sort of, and I think there's certainly a play around like to be able to do that. There's sort of the line between that and then like programmatic SEO I think probably starts to blur between sort of whether it's like originally created content or is it programmatic SEO where you're sort of taking data sets, slicing it,
Right.
and then enriching it and combining a couple different ones and then pushing out, with programmatic content. So I think there's some examples of programmatic SEO working. I think I'm cautious about anything that doesn't require sort of new information and work. I think there's so much value in ranking well in Google for the right sites that I'm hesitant to apply a programmatic approach that could be easily copied. I think it works like, there's some massive sites out there that do exactly that with sort of a programmatic approach. Usually they have some component of their own data that is adding a lot of value, whether it be like SEMrush or some of these sites that have done these massive plays around how much traffic does X get, and then it's their own data. I haven't seen examples of anyone doing it really successfully without their own proprietary data.
Good. I'm glad I asked because programmatic is a play that a lot of people use. And like you said, it doesn't mean that it's a bad play, but maybe to check the information gain box, it might not suffice in the same way that presenting something brand new that's valuable to Google.
Yeah, and I think the programmatic play can make a lot of sense when it's proprietary data. Like is Airbnb, TripAdvisor, like those are their entire sites are kind of programmatic plays, but they have their own proprietary data that they're bringing to those results. I think it'd be really challenging to sort of grab a data set off of a site like Kaggle, and then produce 1,000 pieces of content and have a high confidence that will ultimately perform well in Google. It might for a bit.
Couple more questions on this, and then we'll move on. Like advice for content creators, especially those that don't have large teams or a lot of resources to go out and get content that is worthy of information gain. They to your point, they are good writers, but they're lacking this information gain gap, and it looks like they're staring right up a mountain, up a huge mountain to try to get this. And we don't want, people to have to go out and spend a ton of effort and only be able to get a limited data set and then not be able to maximize their time and effort there. So what are some tips for people to kind of find information gain advantages, especially when they're small content creators?
So I'd say it doesn't, I think that there's, for studies to be sort of meet the editorial standard to ultimately get linked to by journalists, that there's a daunting standard there. And we sort of chase after that frequently within our own content marketing. But a lot of our pieces of content will use a very small amount of new data, like a 10 article test. We were using the kind of the lip chap example, but even if it's like something as simple as like grabbing a few kinds that you have around the house and saying taking a photo of which one had the lasted the longest to water. That if that it's like a 15-minute effort. I think the bar for content has constantly been raised. And so I think that's if you're talking sort of how do I do that for a $50 piece of content? I don't think you do. But I don't know if that's the right way to play this game right now.
Okay.
And so I think the bar has been raised, and if that means do fewer pieces but bring something new to that one piece, I think that is a better approach in sort of the post HCU world that we're in.
I think that's a really valuable point to consider is as you are considering, if you're listening, how do I get information gain in? And you're running up against, well, how do I continue to produce the same amount of content and work information gain in? That might be the juxtaposition you have to solve first and foremost before you start to think about how do I add all this to everything that I'm typically doing. Maybe the first conversation you need to have is how does this play into the new way of content creation?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think I mean, and this trajectory is no different than it's been. I can't imagine this trajectory changing either. Like, this has been no different than it was. Talked about at the start of this, but like, the back in the day, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the bar was way lower than it is now. And is that bar going to get lower or higher in a world of AI overviews? And if all you're providing into the world is words, LLMs are going to continue to sort of eat our lunches if we're competing with them on words alone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about content optimization. Kind of start to put a bow on this topic here. Let's talk about content optimization that you're doing, that you've talked about at Originality.ai, maybe as like a more modern content optimization process. How do you use that in today's environment? Now, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe we can kind of get into a nuts and bolts approach to how to use content optimization today.
Yeah. So now, right now on our team, we use our own content optimization tool to evaluate if writers are clearing a certain bar, and then doubling down on the writers that are producing content that will predictably rank well in Google. And we've had enough data to sort of verify that. So what does that actually look like? So every piece of content that we get from writers goes to our editor. The editor runs that piece of content through Originality. We want no AI content. We want no plagiarism. We want it to be a certain readability range, factually accurate, and then a content optimization score that is ideally above a certain threshold. If it massively misses the mark, then there's sort of additional. It's a bit up to the editor to sort of dig in further. And if we have a writer that is consistently missing a mark, then we'll deprioritize work to that writer and focus in on writers that are producing content that we are confident is going to be more likely liked by Google. And so that's how we're using it. We will recycle with writers if their score is too low. It's just a challenge because the black box nature. We can have them sort of rework it, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that the score will go up. So that's sort of the downside to the sort of a more modern AI approach to content optimization. But for us, we find it really effective at being able to sort of cycle through writers and evaluate which writers are going to be more likely to produce content that will perform well.
What do you see trend in terms of successful writers that consistently submit content and it consistently shows up with your new modern optimization techniques as more likely to rank?
Base expertise, interest, knowledge of the domain that they're writing about. I think that's probably if I were to say what's the one thing that is consistently true, I'd rather have a knowledgeable semi-expert that's interested and a poor writer, and then an editor to sort of close the poor writing gap, than a great writer that isn't knowledgeable about the topic that they're writing about.
Interesting. Okay, that's a very succinct answer. I like it. Anything else outside of expertise that you've noticed tends to separate people and separate writers and separate content when it comes to using these content optimizers that you've developed?
Yeah. It's kind of the same word, but like passion for the topic is another one where it's like, it's kind of the same. I mean, actually you can have an expert that is unpassionate about the topic. And so you have vice versa, but I'd say maybe it's just, those are slightly different, but kind of the same, where it's like, do they care? And I know that's a really fuzzy answer, and I wish I could sort of say like, oh no, it's like 3 H1s, like it's one H1, 4 H2s. Like, it's like, but then we get so close, but that we get back to the sort of like the dumb math approach to content optimization. But certainly in terms of the AI approach, what does it consistently identify as writers that perform well? And it's passion and expertise. I think different niches need to have a different sort of, if that was a scale, you would want to be higher on the expertise side and lower on the passion side. If we were talking about like, skin related diseases, like if it was anything in the the your money, your life sort of world. But yeah, passion and expertise seem to lead to higher scores.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think a lot of the reason why this topic is just so difficult to wade into for people who have made a history of ranking content is because you've said it super bluntly so many times. Like, as someone who is an SEO, you're prone to like A plus B equals C. And usually you like it, the more complicated it is, the more you thrive in that. And that has been SEO historically. And in many ways, producing content nowadays, it's not that it's no longer about A plus B equals C, but it's about A plus B plus some undefined set of thing that's never been seen before will equal C. And so I think that's probably the rub or the friction that a lot of people feel, is that the more it's undefined, the harder it is to really, we'll say, create a system around, create scale around, outsource it, even insource it, but trust a team member with. And so it does make it a lot more open-ended. And I think that's the friction that maybe this entire conversation does create in a lot of people.
I feel that friction all the time. Like I am an unpassionate writer. But I like this. I like building the machine that produces content that ranks well on Google, and it has gotten a far fuzzier. The machine no longer works every single time. Like it has gotten far fuzzier in terms of the output compared to what this kind of machine you used to be able to build that would predictably produce content that would rank in Google. And so it is a rub, and I'd say it is a sort of the new nature. And it's now, there's fuzzy variables in the machine now, which is challenging and unsettling.
Yep, it's the new world we live in. I feel like I say that every week on the news podcast episode, and here it is blending its way over into some of these interviews we're doing and stuff. So yeah, Jon, where can people kind of learn more about some of the tools you've talked about, what you're up to, keep up with what you're doing at Originality.ai?
Yeah, so Originality.ai is the place. That's sort of where we're building what we hope is sort of the modern tool set for copy editors to QA QC any piece of content to make sure it meets their standards, whether it's editorial guidelines, compliance, fact checking, spell checking, AI and plagiarism, and then content optimization. So we're trying to build for this world at Originality.ai, and anyone can connect with me. Jon at Originality, Jon at Originality.ai, or on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Jon, good to have you back. It kind of a new era, like you said, but it was a good topic, a topic that we have not really covered in depth, especially since the HCU. Some interesting stuff that you shared there, so I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, right on. Thanks a lot, Jared. Always fun.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. I just wanted to remind you that if you are ready to start building smarter, faster, and easier internal links, you should check out Link Whisper. You can get $15 off Link Whisper when you use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use the code PODCAST in order to save $15. Thanks again for listening.